Hello and welcome to Policy and Politics with me, Tarun Nangia. Today we are going to discuss an issue about the Jindal Energy Group, or this company which is promoted by Sajjan Jindal, and have the alert shareholders, which is the minority shareholders as well as the institutional shareholders, even prevented an over invoicing of imports scam or a coal scam in that case, because they have voted against the resolution which stated that a Singapore entity which was owned by Sajjan Jindal's wife and daughter, that entity will be used by the JSW, which is the Jindal Power Group, to get coal to India. So basically it's a company based in Singapore. The coal will come from Indonesia, but it will be routed through this company. In all effect, there is no value addition happening in Singapore. So why such a deal was in the, at the start planned by Sajjan Jindal, and routing it via a company which is owned by his wife and daughter. So have the alert shareholders prevented a transaction which could have been deemed illegal later on? We will discuss this today. And I have with me an eminent panel. I have got with me Justice Iqbal Ahmed Ansari. He served as the Chief Justice of Patna High Court. I have with me Advocate Gagan Kumar. He's a chartered accountant as well as the founder of Krishnomics Legal. I have the founder of PSL Advocates and Solicitors with me, Advocate Sameer Jain, joining today. I would like to thank each one of you for sparing your time. And if you see, I'll lay the ground first. Sajjan Jindal promoted JSW Energy, that's the name of the firm, wanted to import coal from Indonesia and a few other countries by using a company based in Singapore owned by Sajjan Jindal's wife and daughter. This resolution was defeated. This resolution was defeated by the minority shareholders and the institutional shareholders. I would like to point out that earlier with this company, Sajjan Jindal-led JSW Energy has done a business of 6,500 crores, which is almost $1 billion. So we will start with Sameer Jain. Sameer, to lay the ground first, prima facie, what do you feel about such a deal?
Tarun, deals like these are quite apparently, in absence of any other fact, appears to be a layering transaction where, say, a $40 coal is imported into India as an $82, $85 unit. It is important to understand this is not the first time a transaction like this is happening. I must mention that due to the effort of this government in 2016, Directorate of Revenue Intelligence cracked down on as many as 30 companies undertaking similar transactions where the coal used to physically move from Indonesia to India, but the invoicing of the title used to pass over 2-3 companies by layering the invoices, which used to start at $40 or $45 and used to reach India at $85. So this is essentially, putting the money from Indian shareholders' pocket into a shell entity or a post-hoc company outside.
Okay, which indeed reeks of siphoning out money in a way. You're making a very serious point here. I'll go across to Advocate Gagan Kumar at his point for his view. JSW Energy wanted to purchase coal from Indonesia, South Africa, Australia, Mozambique, but route the purchase through a Singapore company owned by JSW Energy's promoter's wife and daughter's company, which is JSW International Trade Corp. What do you feel about such transactions?
Tarun, as much as we may have a mordacious criticism of the transaction, one would have to really look into the facts. And from the very face of it, as Sameer pointed out, that it looks like a layering transaction. But from an income tax perspective, the way I would look at it is, undoubtedly, it is an international transaction between related parties. The question here would be whether the transaction was carried out at an arm's length price. That's one. Secondly, whether the transaction was structured only to obtain a tax benefit, or was there a commercial substance behind it? Now, here I may meander a bit and take you to little background of in my research, what I came across, that Rio Tinto a Brazilian company focusing on iron ore was set up in China, and somewhere in 2010 it faced certain challenges there. There were certain employees who were arrested or faced some issues with the authorities. They moved to Singapore. They were followed by other big companies like BHP Billiton and Vale. And ultimately, the Singapore became the hub of iron ore trading companies. Now, to the best of my understanding, currently, roughly 90% of trading of international iron ore takes place through Singapore. So the question which would really need to be introspected at this level would be whether the transaction was motivated by tax consideration or because of the commercial substance.
Okay, that's a fair point. I'll go across to Justice Ansari at this point. Sir, I would want to know from you, is this a case of clear related party transaction which will obviously come under the scrutiny?
The common perception is that the majority shareholders can defeat the views of the minority shareholders. We must remember that the majority shareholders also have to act in the interest of the company. The welfare of the company is paramount for the purpose of all kind of administration under the company law. In fact, there is a very old English decision where the aunt owned 55% share and her niece owned 45% share. Our aunt wanted to bring structural changes which were detrimental to the interest of the niece, but she was a minority shareholder. So aunt's contention was, since I have the majority, I can carry the resolution. This was turned down by the court by saying that as of right, majority shareholders cannot act against the interest of the minority shareholders. So it would be wrong to presume that the majority shareholder can carry on with the resolution or carry out a resolution for the purpose of, or denying the interest of the minority shareholder. Here in this particular transaction, it is the majority shareholders which will enjoy the benefit, but so far as the minority shareholders are concerned, they will be running into losses, and Mr. Samir has already pointed out, and of course Mr. Gagan Kumar agrees that it is a layering transaction. In that event, I don't think legally it is feasible to sustain such a transaction.
So legally not feasible is clearly what Justice Ansari is saying. We'll go across to Samir Jain. Samir, you said that earlier also a few companies were investigated for such a transaction where they had over-invoiced coal imports. Could you share with us what could be the motivation others than over-invoicing for structuring? You want to buy something directly, you can, but to route it through a third company owned by, say, Sajjan Dindal in this case, his wife and daughter, which is a promoter-related entity where the other shareholders won't benefit. What could be the motivations, A, and what kind of laws will it fall foul of?
So Tarun, what happened, and I draw my inference from the remand application which was filed by the Director of Revenue Intelligence in February of 2016, when they arrested a gentleman for a transaction worth around 280 crores of a similar nature. What the remand application disclosed as modus was very, very simple, so to say, that the physical movement of coal started from Indonesia, was destined towards Delhi or India, and the order was placed by a postbox company in Dubai at the actual rate at which the Indonesian company sells the coal. Now, without that coal being processed in any way, without any value addition being done in that coal, that company then sold that coal to India at double or say 80% to 100% higher rates. Now, the objective of doing this transaction can be manifold. It can either be to take the money out, which is the differential of the coal price by the Indonesian company and what actually it was sold off in the coffers of the foreign postbox companies. what needs to be seen essentially as, and also Mr. Kumar hinted that what is the actual purpose for which the coal is being used. If you're using the coal for captive consumption, very well, you use 100 rupee coal or a $40 coal, doesn't matter. But when the coals are being used by power generation companies, unfortunately, this increased price of coal in energy value is absorbed by way of increasing the per unit tariff which you and me use. So essentially what happens is that the power unit which should ideally be sold at 2 rupee or 3 rupee a unit ends up getting inflated by another 1.5 to 2 rupees a unit. And that's how the money goes out, not only from the shareholders' coffers, which would otherwise would have been available for distribution, and also from the consumer's pocket, which is the general public. So,
very important point by Samir Jain. He's saying if coal prices is inflated by the promoter, for example, a hypothetical situation, if Sargent Jindal imports coal through a Singapore company, which also gets a certain percentage, which means the coal price goes up, which means the price of power generation goes up, which means these companies can then ask for more money for their power, which means the consumer will pay more. Very valid point by Samir Jain. People will end up subsidizing the promoters of a private power generation company. That
yes.
I go across to Mr. Gagan Kumar. Sir, I want to know from you, what about the transfer pricing rules? Does it pass muster with that?
So if I can step back for a moment and put it like this, that the transaction would have to be viewed from three lenses. One is from the national resource lenses, which Samir ji pointed out very succinctly. The second would be from a corporate governance perspective, whether it was fair to the minority shareholder or not, on which Justice Ansari touched upon. And third is from a transfer pricing and the GAR perspective. Now, from a transfer pricing perspective, what I would like to test from as a tax authority, whether the transaction was at arm's length price. How do I test that? I would look at what were the functions which were performed by the Singapore entity, what are the assets which were employed, and what was the risk which were taken by the Singapore entity. Based on that, whether the price which was charged by the related party, is it comparable to a similar trading company which would have charged me the price for performing the similar function? That is from a transfer pricing perspective. Secondly, if you look at it from the other perspective, that is, if tax authorities decide to do a bit of prodding and intend to invoke provisions like general anti-avoidance rules, the GAR provisions as we usually call them, would they like to examine whether the transaction had a commercial substance, or was it created as a layer only for the promoters to pocket their bit of profit and park it outside India, not get it taxed in India? Why this transaction was not structured directly from the Indian entity? Was the purchase department not sufficient to negotiate the prices with the international companies for import of coal? Why is Singapore chosen as a jurisdiction to set up such a subsidiary? Now, when I talk about GAR, essentially we have to see two aspects. Whether there is a tax benefit which is being obtained, probably yes, because the corporate tax rate, there is a substantial difference in the earlier year also between the Indian corporate tax rate and the Singapore tax rate. The second option, or the second point which would have to be examined, is whether there was a commercial substance. And there I go back to my initial comment that whether Singapore has developed as an international hub for iron ore trading companies. If yes, whether the functions which were performed were in accordance or were in line with the other trading companies. And then we come back to the transfer pricing provision. So that's the way I would look at it.
Okay. I'll go across to Justice Ansari. So I would want to know from you, prima facie, when you see this kind of a transaction, what are the first impressions in your mind? Why would somebody do like this?
Have any material to point out that it was beneficial for the primary company to import coal from the Singapore company, which was a kind of a subsidiary only. It is a clearing transaction. And in a layering transaction, as we say, commercially, it becomes necessary to lift the corporate veil. If you lift the corporate veil, the transaction becomes very clear that it is not for the benefit of the entire company. Because as Mr. Samir has pointed out, ultimately, the company pays more and the company realizes from the consumers. So that way, it cannot be said to be a bona fide transaction. And if it is not a bona fide transaction, it can neither defeat the interests of the minority shareholders, nor can it be upheld even in the name of maintaining a lower rate of tax.
Okay, okay. In this case, if you see JSW Energy, which is controlled by Sajjan Jindal, they wanted to import coal worth 9,000 crore rupees and route it via a company owned by Sajjan Jindal's wife and daughter. Samir, I want to know from you, what are the law violations that could have happened, or what are the investigations that could have happened given this transaction? And prima facie, why do you think such kind of a structuring is even being thought of by the promoter?
So, Tarun, very simplistically speaking, a high seas sale or a layering transaction is per se not illegal. As Mr. Kumar and Justice Ansari also said, it will have to be seen what is the exact nature of the transaction. However, before averting to what laws are violated, it is important to understand that from an electricity generation perspective, how exactly the modus is. And I'm again taking my cue from the 2016 expose and the investigation by the DRI. Now, say a company based in Dubai will order coal at $45 a ton from Indonesia, which is the actual price of the coal. That coal would then be sold at say $82 a ton to another company in India. And that company then further sells it at $87 a ton to the power generation company. Now, it is important to be seen that in all this transaction, the coal is not moving from Singapore to Indonesia to Singapore to India. The coal is moving on a ship from Indonesia to India without any value addition. So first we'll have to be seen what was the purpose of buying a $45 coal at $87 or selling it at $87 in India. Now, when the pricing of electricity is determined, it is determined by an agency called the Central Electricity Regulation Commission, which is the CERC, which comprises of two components. One is the energy component and second is the capacity charges. Now, energy charges is where the fuel prices are built in terms of determining the prices. Now, if the generation company is getting a $45 coal at 87, it will very naturally build up that price into the energy charges into the per unit charge. So it relates to inflation of the electricity charges, which then you and me pay. As far as the laws which are violated,
yes.
Now there can be various violations of the Companies Act in terms of related party transaction if the due approvals have not been taken. There can be violation of Income Tax Act if there is transfer pricing violation. Now, interestingly, Schedule B of the PMLA says that any violation of either the Customs Act, the SEBI regulations, or the Companies Act of 2013, in terms of the fact it is detrimental to the financial health of the company and detrimental to shareholders in general, maybe within the realm of PMLA be concerned as money laundering. So, of course, PMLA may also get retracted. But again, I may once again cautiously tread and say that I am saying it purely on the basis of what 2016 transaction that DRI exposed.
That's a fair point. But Samir, you also point out there is not much reason why would somebody float a company in Singapore to do such imports. I'll go across to Mr. Gagan Kumar and rely on his expertise for this. What do rules regarding placing of effective management say on such kind of issues?
Yeah, so Justice Ansari mentioned about lifting of corporate veil, and for a moment I'll step back again And I'll refer to a recent judgment by the Federal Court of Appeal of Canada in the case of Cameco Corporation. So where the way it happened there is that this Canadian company had a US subsidiary which was into processing of uranium. And after the breaking up of Russia, it was negotiating directly till about 92, 93. And in 93, it set up its a subsidiary company in Luxembourg, which was entrusted with the job of negotiating the market price, etc., with the Russian company. Later on, it was further transferred to another subsidiary, and the tax authorities in Canada sought to tax the profit made by Luxembourg company in Canada, saying that it was a motivated transaction. But ultimately, on the facts of that case, because the functions which were performed were adequate, the Federal Court of Appeal negated the contentions of tax authorities and held that such a profit cannot be taxed in Canada. Coming to the issue of place of effective management, earlier the regulations were that the foreign companies would be regarded as Indian company only if the total control and management of such company is resided in India. Now it has been diluted to make place of effective management in India. And what essentially place of effective management in India means that the key management decisions are taken in India. Now, how do we establish that, considering that the promoters, this promoter company is in turn owned by another company, which is owned by the wife and daughter of Mr. Jindal. So can it be said that the decisions are ultimately taken from India? Probably yes, probably no. We do not know what are the facts. One would have to examine the minutes of the meeting and what is the degree of authority which has been exercised by the management in Singapore. Apart from that, there are regulations now notified by the Central Board of Direct Taxes as to how to determine place of effective management in India, which essentially says that if the passive income is less than 50% outside India, there could be a sense that it is place of effective management in India.
Mr. Gagan Kumar, a supplementary question, a caveat I want to ask you. The shareholders of JFW Energy said that we will be at a loss if company owned by the promoter in the Singapore is allowed to procure coal. The second point is, in the past 3 years, 6,500 crore worth of goods have come from that very company to JSW Energy. Is that a subject matter of investigation? And of course, you can continue to answer your question.
Well, from the whatever I have read about the transaction, it does not appear that it is a subject matter of the investigation, and I may not be privy of the income tax case going on and whether department has raised this issue at any point during the assessment proceedings or not. But just to come back to that passive income would also include sale and purchase both with the related party. So in this case, since it is only the sale by the related party, that is the Singapore entity with the Indian company, so it may not qualify as passive income. But again, as of now, it would be conjecturing unless one would have the complete facts, which only tax authorities can ask for. It would be too early to judge on these aspects.
Okay.
But there would be gray areas, I would say.
So I go across to Justice Ansari. Sir, how do you see, I mean, there has been a coal import, as they say, over invoicing of coal import investigation by DRI into as many as 30 companies. Again, a company attempts to do a similar transaction. We really don't know whether they actually were intending to over invoice or was this a tax saving transaction in that sense. But what is the prima facie inference that you can draw from this?
See, in all transactions, we have to think of the natural course of action of a company which works for the welfare of all the shareholders. If that becomes the principle, and that is the predominant principle, then it is apparent that in this particular case, unless the promoters show that what they have done is in the interest of the company, which is that, in that event, this transaction cannot but be treated as illegal.
Okay. That's a point coming from Justice Ansari. Samir, I want to go to you here. Samir, there are two things here. The concern of institutional investors, and institutional investors can be anything from pensioners' money to common man investors' money. They are fearing that the promoters will derive all benefit. Now, if such transactions are attempted in India, do you think it shakes the investor confidence in India, even of foreign investors?
Tarun, it's not me saying this. It's the ease of doing business index which says this. And it's important to note that in 2018 we slipped 3 points in ease of doing business and 6 places in 2019. So quite naturally, it appears to be shaking the faith of the institutional and foreign institutional investors into investing in Indian public limited companies. It's not an issue which only relates to the minority shareholders. I will just put a hypothetical situation. What if those minority shareholders were also shareholders in the Singaporean company? Then probably the grievance of we not being benefited from this transaction might not have arisen. But what is important to be seen in a transaction like this is what is the ultimate purpose for which such transactions or such product is being imported into the country. If the purpose for such import is public purpose, which is to sell it to power generation companies, then I am at a loss at least to think as to why a raw material which is essential to the production should be sold at twice the price at which it is normally being available. I understand that domestic production of coal has been marred by either uncertainties or judicial uncertainty in terms of banning of coal. So there has been a natural preference towards imported coal. And also from the gross calorific value GCV perspective, the foreign Indonesian coal is apparently better. So a lot of factors will have to be seen in judging whether a transaction per se like this will be illegal.
Samir, you made a fair point. Even if minority shareholders were part of the Singapore company, why do you need a company in Singapore if the product is coming directly from, say, Indonesia to India? Unless there is some element of profit involved, it's as clear as daylight. There has to be something which.
Correct.
But I'll rely on the expertise of Mr. Gagan Kumar in this case. Prima facie, in that sense, I mean, the income tax will look into it, or other agencies might want to look into it. Do you think that this raises certain suspicions in your view?
Well, if you see it from a point of view of fairness and corporate governance, certainly it raises issue because shareholders, or even for that matter, all stakeholders, be it the tax authorities, be it the lenders, everyone would be looking at a lesser profit.
Yes.
And a chunk of profit is parked personally by the promoter group company outside India. So if you see it from a fairness perspective and a corporate governance perspective, certainly this transaction raises eyebrows. And shareholders were right in objecting to passing that resolution. But from a tax perspective, one would really have to go by the literal interpretation. And unless it is tainted with the sinister mindset of tax evasion, tax authorities probably will not object. But again, that is something which would be a subject matter of further investigation by the tax authorities.
Okay.
One more point I just want to add is also a perspective which is banking. Now, most of the company which are capital intensive have huge banking exposure in terms of working capital limits and other loans. Now, once you pay double the price of a product and that money goes outside of India, there is a huge possibility that money also includes the public money which has been lent out by the bank in terms of working capital facilities in a transaction like this. So a lot of perspectives will have to be analyzed, but in a very set facts of the case.
Yes, so basically it's not a fair transaction, can also be looked into. Important points coming from all our three panelists. I would like to individually thank Advocate Gagan Kumar, Advocate Samir Jain from PSL Advocates and Solicitors, Gagan Kumar from Krishnomics Legal, also Justice Ansari for sharing us, your time, giving us time today for this episode. We'll do a follow-up soon, but thank you so much for joining us today. I hope the alert investors and shareholders will look into why promoters attempt such transactions, which in a sense scoop off the profits of companies in India only to benefit the promoters. Thank you all of you for joining on this episode of Policy and Politics.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.